Harbor. I see Delegate Stein. I see Dave Namazi here for Dr. Morales-Wilhelm. I see David Lapp. I see David Smedick. Darren, are you here on behalf of Secretary Wiedefeld?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. I see Eric Fisher. Welcome, Eric. Ian, are you here on behalf of Director Pinsky?
Yes, he's unavailable today.
Welcome, Ian. I see Jamie DeMarco here on behalf of Jennifer Mizrahi. I see Jason DeBow here for Secretary Flora. I see Jesse Iliff. I see a Josh Kurtz. Is that Secretary Kurtz? Or is it his doppelganger? Ah, I see. There we go. I see DNR.
Here under Steve's name for Secretary Kurtz.
Thank you, Ryland. I see Secretary Addix. I see Co-Chair Kim Coble. I see Kim Pezza on behalf of Comptroller Learman. We're almost to the list here, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I see Administrator Belton. I see Mike Powell. See Mike Hinson. Are you here on behalf of Secretary Strickland?
I am. He sends his regards. Unfortunately, he can't make it today.
Understood. Thank you. I see Dr. Gilden and Dr. Dickerson. I see our chair, Secretary McElwain. Are there commissioners or proxies who I missed on the way through the list?
Jamie Raley from Maryland Farm Bureau.
Sorry, I missed you, Mr. Raley.
It's quite all right. I just got on. Thank you.
Excellent. Zachary Carey.
Yeah, Zachary Carey, proxy for Dr. Wright, Superintendent of Schools.
Thank you. Daniel Chase.
Daniel Chase, proxy for Secretary Chaudhry at DGS.
Thank you. Alexis Foxworth.
Yes, Alexis Foxworth, proxy for PSC Chair Fred Hoover.
Thank you. Brian McGauley.
Hi, Brian McGalley, recently appointed to the commission. I represent Constellation.
Okay, any other commissioners or proxies? Okay, so we have a quorum, Madam Chair. We have 25 members present at the meeting.
Excellent. All right, shall I get started? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Chris. And welcome everyone to this final meeting of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. And I actually do mean it this time when I say this is the final meeting. I think I've said that twice already, but we really are. This is it today. So the goal today is we want to finalize the deliberations of the remaining recommendations from the working groups that were presented this year. And then after that, we will really attend to the final duty of the year, which is what we must do and we were going to do only at this meeting, which is to vote to approve the final or the annual report. And just remember that annual report is going to include all the recommendations. So the ones today and all the ones we've talked about thus far. As you can see, we are virtual today. So I really hope that none of you are downstairs. So welcome again. And I think since we are virtual, which I don't recall us ever being all virtual, I do encourage, and I see most of you have your cameras on, but I do encourage you all to turn your cameras on. That way we can see each other and we can have a more productive conversation. So before we get to the main part of this agenda, we're going to listen to the public comments first, and then we can talk about just a few housekeeping items. So before I turn things over to you, Chris, to do that for us, I do want to take this minute or moment really just to thank all of you for your hard work, your dedication, and more importantly, your patience this year. It has been a long and difficult process this year because for one reason, really, and it's because all of us, this commission, we take the job that we have as commissioners very seriously, and we take climate change very seriously. So it's really been a pleasure this year. Hopefully we'll do things a little more efficient next year. Well, we can talk about that another time, but it has been a pleasure to be with you all this year. All right. From there, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can walk us through the public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have 6 members of the public who have raised their hands so far. That's a good number. So I'll ask everyone to please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. We'll start there. Hopefully we can be a little bit faster than that. Thank you for your cooperation with that. First on the list is Mike O'Halloran.
Hi, good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, my name is Mike O'Halloran, here today representing the Mid-Atlantic Petroleum Distributors and Mid-Atlantic Propane Gas Associations. We filed comments originally back in September, and I believe they were circulated again to the commission members this afternoon. So I want to thank Jared and Mark with MDE for doing that. MAPTA and MAPCA filed these comments jointly in response to the recommendations primarily by the Mitigation Working Group to the full commission. Broadly, these recommendations seek to raise roughly $1 billion in taxes and fees that would have a devastating effect on the state's economy. We urge the commission instead to consider a broad-based energy policy that recognizes the importance of affordable, reliable power that still moves toward lower greenhouse gas emissions at a measured pace. Not a sole source energy policy as suggested in the state's climate pollution reduction plan, and is implicit in these recommendations, in particular the approved recommendation that, when combined with the department's forthcoming zero emissions heating equipment standard, effectively forces consumers into purchasing an electric heat pump. This kind of forced transition will put further strain on the state's already strained grid. Adding an economy-wide cap and trade program hands Marylanders another bill when they least can afford it. Maryland has the second highest state and local tax burden for individuals. So assuming the tax and fee proposals before the commission will simply be absorbed by companies or businesses upstream is a dangerous assumption. The cost will be borne by Marylanders, adding to an already high tax burden. So taken together, these policies would have a devastating effect on our economy, along with our competitiveness regionally and nationally. These proposals are coming at a time when the state is facing a ballooning structural deficit. And even by the department's own analysis, the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan estimates it to cost the state $1 billion per year once fully implemented. These recommendations, again, will be borne, the cost of them will be borne by Maryland residents and businesses, with some of the latter being forced out of business altogether. This is particularly concerning since there are already other technologies and fuel choices that provide immediate greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but are being ignored. These include biofuels, renewable fuels, and propane as other options for homeowners and businesses, all of which can be considered quote unquote drop-in fuels. For these reasons, we urge the commission to reject these recommendations. These approaches have been vetted and rejected by the General Assembly several times, and they would cause irreparable harm to Maryland's economy and its regional and national competitiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next, Bob Simon, Robert Simon.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Robert Simon, and I am representing Maryland Catholics for Our Common Home. We are Catholics from across the state who support legislation in Maryland that protects the environment and promotes environmental justice. To be clear, though, so there's no misunderstanding, we are a different organization than the Maryland Catholic Conference. The We have submitted testimony for today's meeting, urging your support for the Renew Act and the Coal Cleanup and Asthma Mitigation Fund Act. Both bills will provide funding to implement Maryland's climate pollution reduction plan, but in ways that absolutely will not pass through costs to economically vulnerable Marylanders. Neither bill is a tax. From our faith-based perspective, we appreciate the fact that both of these bills will help protect and restore the integrity of God's creation without imposing financial burdens on those least able to bear them. So in the words of Pope Francis, we think they respond to both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Many people of good faith, from diverse faith traditions and communities, share our concern for both environmental protection and environmental justice. We urge you too to support these worthy proposals to make the climate pollution reduction plan a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Next, Scott Waitlevich.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Scott Waitlevich with Columbia Gas of Maryland. Thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly. Just wanted to remind the commission members that we too wrote a letter of concern back in September, jointly with Chesapeake Utilities and Washington Gas, expressing concern about the tax proposals. I would concur with Mr. O'Halloran's comments as well, and just focus on one of our primary concerns with the tax proposals is the impact to low and moderate income residents of Maryland, and would respectfully ask the commission, as it considers the tax proposals during today's meeting, to keep in mind the impact of any proposal to raise costs on low and moderate income residents of Maryland. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Next is Jeff Silva.
Hello. Thank you very much for this opportunity. For years, I have witnessed this commission delay voting for proposals that pay for climate protection policies. Appointees of Governor Hogan and Maryland employees resisted any carbon pricing proposals, saying that they did not clearly support a net benefit to Maryland's economy. Now, CNBC has reported to its national business audience that Maryland is one of the top 10 worst prepared states for climate extreme weather events. So far, this commission's ongoing delay has failed to promote a net economic benefit and adequately advise the governor and General Assembly on ways to mitigate the causes and prepare for and adapt for the consequences of climate change. As a retired field environmental risk management professional, I insist that Mitigations Proposal 1B, recommending the Governor and General Assembly pass the Fossil Fuel Transport Fee and Mitigation Fund, be approved by this commission today. The legislation cleverly turns Maryland's disadvantage of location into a way to collect revenue from our neighbors that knowingly let their climate pollutants cross into Maryland. Today, this commission should approve Mitigations Proposal 1A, requiring businesses to report their annual greenhouse gas production. Reporting the annual greenhouse gases is crucial to the Proposal 1A that recommends the Governor and General Assembly to pass greenhouse gas cap and invest program complete. And I ask to have that include the impeachment of state elected officials that failed to finance its operation or failed to enforce violators of the cap invest legislation. Today, this commission should approve Energy Resilience Efficiency Working Group's Proposal 1A that recommends the Public Service Commission issue a policy statement for the prioritization of battery storage and other demand response systems on the distribution grid. I ask that technology to protect the quality of the grid's alternating current be included in the PSA's policy statement, as non-synchronous generation sources make greater contributions to Maryland's portion of the PJM grid. Pass Mitigations Proposals 1A, 1B, pass Energy Resilient Efficiency Proposal 1A. CNBC is advising businesses not to locate here because they'll be driven away by climate damage infrastructure and a disrupted workforce. You have nothing to lose by collecting revenue from fossil fuel use to pay for climate resilience infrastructure improvements or agricultural greenhouse gas mitigation projects while directly
Mr.
mitigating.
Silver, to interrupt, we'll have to wrap up if you don't mind. Thank you.
Your own economic projections show climate projection measures improve Maryland's economy, builds additional personal income while removing life-harming pollutants from our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Kate Corton.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Kate Corton. I'm with the Environmental Defense Fund. We're a global nonprofit, and our teams have been really deeply engaged in the development of cap and invest programs in other U.S. states and other places around the world. I just want to start by saying this couldn't be a more important time to be having these conversations. With the likely rollback of federal environmental progress and climate progress, state leadership is really needed now to reach our 2030 climate targets. And cap and invest is exactly the type of transformative policies that states should be pursuing. So really commend the Commission for having these discussions. And as the recommendations on cap and invest before the Commission point out, these policies are fundamentally important for two reasons. They can help us meet our climate targets by establishing declining limits on climate pollution, and they can drive significant investments in the climate transition. These investments are flexible and can be used to make sure that that transition is affordable, equitable, and really drives economic growth and progress in clean energy. I just want to point out some recent developments from Washington State, where our team has been deeply engaged. Voters in Washington recently defended their cap and invest program by a margin of 24 points. This is a really significant margin and demonstrates that these programs and the environmental and clean energy investments that they drive are popular. And the coalition that came together around defending that program was really historic, representing nearly 600 organizations, ranging from regulated businesses to labor to public health and many more. Finally, I just want to touch on a few points about costs. This has already been raised today, and there have been a lot of really important discussions that the Commission and working groups have had on the cost of these programs. First, it's really important to underscore that the cost of policies like cap and invest, and really any policies to meet our climate targets, can't be evaluated in a vacuum. We have to recognize that there are costs associated with the status quo, both climate impacts and the costs of those that are already stacking up for Maryland residents and businesses, public health costs associated with fossil fuel pollution, and there are costs to upgrading and expanding an aging fossil-based energy system, whether we transition that to a clean system or not. Second, there has been really extensive research showing that cap and invest offers the lowest cost path to achieve economy-wide climate targets. That's why our organization has been strongly supportive of these policies for so many years. And finally, cap and invest offers significant flexibility in terms of how the regulatory program is designed and how revenues are invested to help insulate consumers, particularly low and moderate income households, from program costs. So in short, the benefits of these policies far outweigh their costs. And I hope the Commission keeps that in mind as you deliberate today. So we really recommend that the Commission advance the recommendations before it on cap and invest, and appreciate you all having these really important discussions at a time where it could not be more needed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Dave Arndt.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity, Commission. I'm here representing the Maryland Legislative Coalition Climate Justice Wing. We have submitted our comments, so I will not read from them. Basically, what I have to say is we are in a climate crisis, and it's going to cost Maryland billions of dollars in the upcoming years. This is a fact, and now we must deal with it. Either we have polluters pay for our mitigation and reduction efforts, or taxpayers will pay. If you vote down these proposed revenue raisers that put the bill squarely on the polluters, you are in essence increasing the taxes to all taxpayers in Maryland. Do you want to be known as administration that increased the taxes in Maryland, or do you want to be known as administration that stood up to polluters and made them pay? Thank you.
Thank you. Our final public comment is from Hannah Allen.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Madam Secretary. Good afternoon. I'm Hannah Allen here on behalf of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce, which represents over 7,000 businesses throughout the state, small, medium, and large. I second Mike O'Halloran and Scott's comments, so I won't spend time and repeat them. You have written letters that the Chamber and other business and industry groups have submitted to the Commission for this meeting and in past meetings as well. But I just want to spend a minute, looking at this from a higher level, and I really urge the Commission to consider the broader impacts and implications of recommending and potentially implementing some of the tax and revenue policies sent up from the mitigation working group. As I'm sure you're well aware, Maryland is facing a lot of economic pressures, and in many states, especially some of our neighboring and regional states, are outperforming us when it comes to overall competitiveness, cost of doing business, tax environment, cost of living. The list really goes on. So introducing over $1 billion in new costs annually is not something we feel pushes the economy in the right direction. There are certainly broader issues the state is dealing with when it comes to electrification goals, right? There's energy production within the state, issues with that, substantially rising costs of energy, as we've seen with the recent PJM auction this summer, grid load instability concerns, local opposition to building out grid infrastructure, delays in renewable energy projects coming online, and much more. So as the state is grappling with a growing budget deficit and looks to new sources of revenue, especially in the 2025 session, businesses will struggle to absorb additional costs during an already challenging economic climate. So with that, we would urge the Commission to reject the tax and revenue raiser recommendations and pursue climate policies in a balanced manner that allows for an inclusive energy mix and really is considering Maryland's economic realities at a broader level. So with that, I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who offered public comment. That concludes public comment, so we can move to the next item on the agenda. Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again for your comments. Really appreciate it. I think now we need to move to just a few housekeeping items. As you all know, for the last couple of meetings, we've been just focusing really specifically on our agenda items, and we've run out of time, and we just wanted to make sure we got through all the recommendations. So with that, I'm embarrassed to say we failed to approve the previous minutes. So I know it's not ideal, but I would like for us to see if we can quickly get through the previous minutes and approve them so we can move on quickly into the deliberations. So Chris, can you just walk us through the approval of those minutes, please?
Sure thing. So included in the materials for this meeting, distributed a couple of weeks ago, and again this morning, there are draft minutes for the Commission for meetings so far this year. If it's amenable to the chair and other members of the Commission, I suggest in the interest of time, we consider them all in one action rather than one by one. So there are...
well, let's assume maybe we should make sure everyone has had an opportunity to look over them. We did include them. If you have an issue with that, you haven't had a chance to look at them, then maybe we wouldn't do the one vote. So could you give us some indication that we're okay with trying to get this done in one vote? Okay, Chris, you can just...
Okay, and I see a hand up from Dave. Okay.
That was inadvertent. I was looking for my thumbs up and did the hand instead. So.
Great. Okay, so there are draft meeting minutes in the package. So I suppose we should open for whether there are any comments or changes suggested to any of the minutes from commissioners. Okay, just giving everyone time to take a look. If commissioners are feeling satisfied they've had a chance to review, we can entertain a motion to approve the minutes, provide the draft minutes provided.
I'll motion to second after Ian's motion to approve.
So we
Thank
have a
you.
motion and a second. And we'll be doing online voting exclusively today, so we will be using the raise hand function. So please, commissioners, please use the raise hand function. Members of the public, we appreciate your input. Please don't, as we'll need to count votes from the commissioners. All of those in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your virtual hands. Okay, so I see 23 yes votes from commissioners. Are there any opposed? So please lower your hands if you're a yes. Are there any opposed? Would anyone like to abstain from the minutes? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I saw it. Was that an abstention from Brian?
That's right. Yeah, I wasn't in attendance last week, so.
Sure, understood. Okay, so thank you all. The minutes have been approved. So we will post final approved versions of the minutes online. So Madam Chair, we can move to the next item, the recommendations discussion.
Okay, so now it's time for us to discuss and vote on the final remaining recommendations before this commission. I think we have 3 recommendations from the mitigation working group about climate funding, and we have 2 from the energy resilience and efficiency working group about clean energy deployment and analysis. So we'll start with the mitigation working group. Kim and Mike, could you begin by introducing your first recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and good afternoon, everybody. Kim Coble, co-chair of the Mitigation Work Group in the Commission. The recommendations from the Mitigation Work Group regarding revenue are the ones that we're discussing today. The original recommendations from the Mitigation Working Group had a preamble that acknowledges the situation that we are in Maryland, that we have ambitious goals to achieve, and the climate plan that the state has written indicates that we're not going to achieve those goals without revenue investments, and specifically a cap and invest program. It acknowledges the hard work that's in front of us. And I'd also like to point out that the public comments I thought today were just outstanding, all of them, because they really captured the complexity of this issue, that if it was easy, it would be done. And it's not easy, nor is it a single-sided issue. And the state is facing a $2.7 billion deficit, as well as having ambitious climate goals. And so how we move forward to advance all of the state's goals is an important consideration. This commission's job, however, is to stay focused on meeting our climate goals. And to that end point, the mitigation work group put forward recommendations to advance a cap and invest program to support what has been amended to be a fossil fuel. What originally was a fossil fuel fee has been amended to be a coal transport fee, and to support the RENEW Act. At this point, I think, Madam Chair, you wanted to make some amendments.
Yes. You want me to get started?
Yeah.
Well, thank you first of all for that, Kim. And I have to say, I agree that the public comments that were made, all of them, like you said, all of them really does showcase for us. It is a complex issue, but there is no doubt that funding initiatives to tackle climate change is critically important. But I do want to caveat that by saying that I think it's really important that before we really decide on the path forward, I think it's important that we, take a step back so that everybody understands what are the impacts to the economy, to Marylanders, and give all of us more information before we get started with the actual step, with particularly the first one, the cap and invest. I think what I'm recommending, and I'll get into that in a second, but I just want to continue to really just point out why I think it's important for us to go down the road that I'm proposing. We do have a very challenging budget situation right now. We have new uncertainties around federal funding and even our MDE's regulatory programs. I think all of that really gives us a reason to just really think strategically and take a pause and just make sure we're doing the appropriate thing and we're doing things in the right order. So with that, Chris, I think you already have it up, but what I would like to propose is an amendment to this recommendation with the language that you see. And so just to orient you a little bit, I do believe that the alternate language that you see here still preserves the important language about the significance of funding from the original recommendation, but it recommends that we study or that we have a study to evaluate the program design next year. And then after that, we could, meaning MDE, that will give us time to figure out, and the General Assembly too, they will have more information, the commissions will have more information. At that point, we could put the reporting in place, and then the General Assembly could have, like I said, more information about exactly what this program looks like in Maryland. What is the impact of the program on the state as a whole, on Marylanders, and then they could decide on what is that next course of action regarding authorizing the full program. I'll turn it over to you all for comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me begin that these amendments do reflect a compromise. The original mitigation working group recommendation was to actually design and implement the program, albeit it was a close vote in the commission, in the mitigation work group. And what Madam Chair has been presenting here is to do a study on the, let me get the language exactly right, because I know this is new. Study options to design and move to implement an equitable strategy to raise revenue for climate programs and investments that decrease emissions, reduce energy costs for businesses and families, and promote equity. However, the recommendation also goes on to say that MDE should adopt a reporting rule requiring major polluters to begin reporting. So the steps we need to develop a cap and invest program are moving forward through the study and through the reporting requirements. So I think it's important to understand progress is being made in this recommendation. The last bullet that says the General Assembly should consider whether or not to direct MDE to adopt a cap and invest program, that's what is probably being postponed a little bit until the information comes in. And I'm supportive of these amendments. Other comments?
I will add that Kim reached out to me shortly before this meeting and discussed these. The position that I had taken in the mitigation working group is that I thought these issues should be studied further and that they should require additional General Assembly action before any of them can be implemented. And it's because of the concerns you heard in the comment period, right? I mean, you've got predictions of a 50-cent per gallon increase in the cost of gasoline, rising to $3.75 per gallon if cap and trade were enforced. I know other people disagree with that, but I don't think we know the answers to these questions. And I'm concerned about what $1 billion of additional fundraising would be. But I agree that these are issues that should be considered and should be, we should get the facts on them before. And so I support the concept on the assumption, and unfortunately I hadn't seen the language till now, that this last phrase would indicate that a cap and invest could not be implemented in terms of collecting any fees or fines until the General Assembly were to consider the results of the study and vote, which is my understanding of it.
Other comments or feedback? And Chris, maybe you can manage. I can't see everybody's hands or anything, so let me know if I'm missing any.
Yeah, any other commissioners who'd like to discuss, please use the raise hand function and we'll know to call on you. Yes, we have Beth Harbor and then Russ Dickerson.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So thanks for explaining the amendment and what you're trying to do here. I just wonder, because there was a lot of discussion about California's program and Washington's program and New York, what path they took. Did they go down a similar road? Are we kind of following the playbook of what they did, or does this are we deviating from that?
I can give some information on that, as I was in California. I work for California's Environmental Protection Agency, and I know all about the program. So CARB reported up through my agency. Back then when Cap and Invest was done, a study was done. It wasn't called a study, but before it was implemented, the chair at that time looked into the entire economic impact on California, on industry, on Californians. Yes, it was studied first. There was a lot of analysis, a lot of discussions that were done at that time, a lot of open listening sessions, public comment. They did a lot. They always do, I have to say, in California before they implement any program, particularly one of this significance.
Okay, thanks. Russ Dickerson.
Thanks. Yeah, in principle, I'm certainly supportive of the idea of providing funding to actually carry out our objectives. I would add a friendly amendment to put in some words to the effect of to verify changes in emissions through direct measurements, or ambient air measurements and numerical models.
Can I ask, so since you're asking about friendly amendment, verify, can you expand on what you're verifying? You're verifying the existing emissions?
Yeah, both. You have to verify existing emissions and their trends.
Yeah.
I know.
Russ, do you have a suggestion of where that would go?
Right after achieve climate goals. And verify progress with direct ambient air measurements and numerical simulations.
I agree with this I will note that we said the study needs to be done by 2025, which in order to keep this train moving, I think is an important deadline. So as long as we can verify the progress and not hold up the report, I'm in support of that.
I don't have a problem with it either.
Okay, process-wise, this is an amendment that the secretary is putting on the table that we will then codify through a motion and a vote. So if the chair, as the proposer, is okay with this, we can simply add it now and then proceed discussing it. The rest of the entire amendment.
I don't have a problem with it.
Okay, thank you. So well, we can turn to David Smeck, David Lapp, and then Dr. Gilden.
Thank you, Chris, Madam Chair. A couple of questions, I think, as I'm digesting this. I want to confirm, my understanding is that what's on the screen now, essentially the 2 bullet points and the 2 preamble paragraphs would replace the entirety of 1A. Is that correct? So the references to how revenue or proceeds would be spent are removed. Is that correct?
That's correct. It will replace the entirety of 1A.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And then I guess what I was listening in to the mitigation working group discussion over the original language, and I came away still a little confused, and I think I still am today on some of the. I'm trying to understand what in this recommendation would not happen if the original recommendation was going forward, if MDE was still pursuing and developing a rule here, because my understanding is a lot of the analysis that would be a part of a study is commonplace for a new regulatory development process. The General Assembly has review of proposed regulations, and they engage in the process. And so I guess I'm trying to just understand a little bit of what the need to call out a study again. I'm not saying this is a bad step. Moving the ball forward for this makes sense to me, but I guess I get a little bit of heartburn again where a commission that's statutorily required to recommend what steps to take to reduce climate pollution, and we're again saying, can we do another study? We've been doing a study on these different policies for a really long time, and even the climate pollution reduction plan, or the exact name of the most recent one, forgive me, said, studied this. It wasn't the same level of detail, maybe, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, that a full regulatory development process would go through in terms of modeling. But that study is out there, and it shows the need for this kind of policy going forward. So I feel like we've done a lot of it, at least in the way that I would imagine. Maybe some assistance here for me would understand what we think a study authorized by the General Assembly, how it would be different than what the climate plan already did, and what would make it different than what we would normally do in a regulatory development process for this.
Okay.
Sorry for the meandering. I think I ended on a question though. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So the climate pollution reduction plan that you mentioned, that you said has already done this, I just want to clarify, that is not a study. It did not do a study on climate, on cap and invest. It recommended as an option to look into, but it did not, we did not have a full-blown study that will look at the economics of it. We know how the study works. I personally know how the study works too. But there's more information that is important that we need. I think all of us, the General Assembly, everyone needs to have before you start going down the reporting rule pathway. So we have never done, there have been studies done, but not the kind of study that we're talking about today. This study will look at everything, not just the high level global things that we know about a cap and invest program. It looks at the entire program as a whole. Like I said, the economic impacts that it has, what those levers are in terms of prices going up, prices going down, who's impacted, who's not impacted. How do you get the right program for our state in Maryland? So it's totally different. You mentioned that this commission has the responsibility of taking the appropriate steps to make sure that we're combating climate change. I feel that this is an important, responsible step in that process.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it.
David Lapp.
Thanks. Part of my question I think has been answered by David Schmidt, but we can't see on the screen the entire paragraph. So I had the same question about whether this was a complete substitute. So I understand that it is, yeah, but it's, so it's keeping, a large part of what's, so is it all this language is being retained, I guess, is one question I had. And then if you can scroll down, sorry to make this difficult. I had a question about whether, the should authorize language, is that necessary for a study to go forward? That's one question. And then on the language that says the study should consider energy affordability and the impact, I assume that the idea is the energy affordability, the impact of a cap and invest on energy affordability. And I'm suggesting maybe that language should say that, because a study on energy affordability and federal funding and it would be much broader than I think what is intended here. So that would just be a friendly suggestion to just make that clear.
I'll just address one issue you brought up, which is you asked a question about why does it say should authorize? I think it's and it's my opinion, and please everybody speak up if you don't agree. I think should authorize is appropriate because it gives the General Assembly the opportunity to look at the results, which would be very detailed, look at the results of the study and determine what is the next path forward. So we're basically allowing the General Assembly to have this information and make a decision. That's why it's on there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, I don't want to, just to clarify, because it's MDE's intent to do the study.
Yes.
You're not seeking permission from the General Assembly. You're just making sure that they authorize it in order to get the results, correct?
Right. But it's still a recommendation. The whole thing is a recommendation. But yes, to answer your question. Yes.
So a process note, David had suggested an insertion clarification to the sentence about what the study should consider, so that it would read, the study should consider the impact of a cap and invest program on energy affordability, rather than simply considering energy affordability. I'm seeing heads nodding from Kim and the chair.
Yeah.
So I'll simply incorporate that language.
It's fine with me.
Could I weigh in? I'm wondering if it should also, or what people would think about also, like we do have in the version, in the prior version, actual methods of addressing the impact. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking perhaps the study should also consider and how to address impacts. Such as those items. I mean, I'm not suggesting they all be listed, but
do we need to be very specific? I don't know, just a question.
Yeah, and I would have a problem if we try to be specific, because my understanding of what's being offered here is a chance to study what we should do. And I think it would be premature to specify what has to be done before we study what should be done.
I wasn't suggesting any of the specifics that are listed, but consideration of methods or means of addressing any impacts identified. I mean, it could be separate.
Do you have specific language to insert, David, that you could offer?
Sure. I'll think of something in just a second. The study should consider.
Okay.
And maybe just at the end, and potential remedial measures or something like that at the end of the sentence.
Something like that.
Yep, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's value added.
I don't have a problem there if
Yeah.
Secretary doesn't.
I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Robin Gilden.
Yes, thank you. Just to put a broader perspective on what Dr. Dickerson had commented on about the monitoring baseline and follow-up. It also would very much help the public health impacts if we could say these methods in general had helped prevent a certain amount of health effects, missed days of school, missed days of work, reduced hospital admissions, so that we can link the policies to preventive healthcare, not just, this climate disaster caused this amount of, asthma or whatever. We don't seem to have the ability to capture the preventive side of things as easily. So.
I'm sorry, which sentence are you referring to? I'm trying to look for it on my end here.
I think it's up higher. Oh, it's right down in the next paragraph. It's got the bracket. That's the second sentence after goals. To verify the progress. Yes, that one. I wanted to explain why it's also important to have these progress and monitoring, not only to measure the environmental successes, but also the public health preventive measures.
I see that as a friendly amendment. It's just expanding on why, just gives a little more information on one of the reasons why it's really important. I personally don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it either.
I think it's great.
I'll accept that. That's where a lot of the benefit will come from.
Yeah.
So then on the screen here, that would be verify progress for both climate mitigation and public health to incorporate that concept. Okay. Okay, thank you. Jamie Raley.
Thank you. I pulled the bill from last year, this year rather, House Bill 1272, Delegate Stein's bill. Take a look at the fiscal summary on it when he introduced legislation for Cap and Invest program. And the initial language that was presented here by Secretary McElwain, I think I could support that until we started entering in more specific information about verifying progress. The section or sentence rather we've just been speaking about. My concern is that we're perhaps narrowing the focus of our recommendation so much to ask for these additional climate mitigation, public health, air measurements, et cetera, that it's going to cause the legislature to perhaps not go forward with this. And I think that we might be missing an opportunity. Whereas if we allowed this to go forward more broadly stated, it might give us a better result. Thank you.
Can I ask, you may be raising an issue that occurred to me, that as we add these issues, are we not also including what I thought the study was also to look at, which was the economic impact? Are we sort of now adding so much on one side of the ledger that it's no longer a study looking at all of the impact?
I agree with you, Mr. Powell, because when I look at these public policy matters, I usually try to find what's the economic impact or even a return on investment. And in the fiscal summary for the bill introduced earlier this year that I just mentioned, that could probably be done, possibly be done by MDE with in-house funds. But if we're going to look for the specifics of where these problems are arising, then we are also going to have to, as you say, look for the specifics about where, what is the economic impact on our state economy and the public in general.
Perhaps a place to do it, if we're going to be adding additional language here, and I apologize, I'm seeing the actual written language same time you are, where we say consider the impact of the Cap and Invest program on energy affordability. If we then put a comma, insert the state's economy and the state's competitiveness after the word affordability, energy affordability, just so we're clear that we're looking at both sides of the ledger. So it'd be affordability, comma, the state's economy, and the state and the competitiveness of the state.
Is it not a part of the economy, the competitiveness?
It could be, except I think that if you look at the comments that were raised by groups, they're really concerned about how we compare. I mean, Maryland had the second worst job growth rate in the country. And I think the fact that we were the second worst job growth in the country means that we need to be looking at, will that affect that? So that's what I have in mind. It's not merely how much it's going to cost us, but how does it affect our ability to be competitive with all the other states around us?
Okay, how do we, I think, so how do we move on with all of those, at least your last comments, your concerns that you just raised? Because I think we captured everybody's comments on there. So let me try and understand the last thing you're saying. Are you saying not to, in your opinion, you would prefer not to see the language so specific? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just saying that if we're going to list the specifics on one side of the ledger, I think we got to list some specific on the other. So I'm fine with the original edition, but I'm afraid it became lopsided if we didn't also include these items. But with all of these items, I'm fine with the way it's drafted right now.
I think I understand. You're saying once we start being a little more specific, prior to you speaking, we had just approved being a little more specific on exactly what we meant. And you're saying if you're going to go down that road, we can go on with a whole bunch of other specifics.
Yeah, and I think here we have enough specifics, but once you start down that road, we can't do half it. So I'm okay with this written now.
Can we agree to just stop the specifics right now and just move forward, since I think we've covered everything as much as we can anyway. And I think we're at a good place where we can move forward and maybe just vote on the amendment and then we can vote. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
See a hand from Beth Harbor.
Yes.
Okay, so then I suggest the commission entertain a motion to amend mitigation working group 1A according to the amendment on the screen here. which has incorporated the recent discussion. Do we have such a motion?
Am I allowed to push my own motion?
We have a motion from the chair to amend MWG 1A in this manner. Do we have a second?
Second. I second.
Okay. We have
Second.
ample seconds. Is there any further discussion of the motion before we vote? Okay, then. So the vote on the table is whether to amend Mitigation Working Group 1A according to the screen here in the recent discussion. Thank you. For those of you raising your hands, all in favor, please raise your hand online. Please keep them up. Okay, thank you. You can lower your hands, the yes votes. Are there any opposed to this amendment? Please raise your hands if you are opposed. Darren and Russ, your hands are still up, but they were supports.
Thanks, Chris. Sorry.
Sure thing. Are there any abstentions? Okay, I don't see any abstentions. So since the vote, so that it has been amended, the vote was unanimous. I suggested the chair, since the vote was unanimous, we could include it in the annual report without an additional vote.
I agree.
Now that it's been amended. If there's
Yeah.
no opposition to that, we can move to the next item. Thank you,
think that-
everyone.
It's a good
Okay,
idea.
this-
Thank you.
This recommendation will be included as amended in the annual report.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. So next up is the Mitigation Working Group's second recommendation. Kim, you want to introduce your second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the original recommendation, as I said, was to authorize a fossil fuel transport fee and mitigation fund. Delegate Stein has offered amendments to that, and I believe also has another suggestion for today. So let me call on Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Kim. Yes, I do have another recommendation. Over the past few days, it's become clear that there wasn't a consensus on whether the bill idea for coal transport fee should be implemented or should it be studied. And so I'm requesting that this particular recommendation, the coal transport fee recommendation, be withdrawn to avoid extended conversation today. I do want to make clear, I will still be introducing the concept behind the coal transport fee as a bill in the upcoming session, but for purposes of today, I request that it not be considered. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any opposition to the commission accepting Delegate Stein's withdrawal and moving on? Okay.
Then we can move to the final mitigation working group recommendation 1C.
So this original recommendation was to pass the Renew Act, which is the Responding to Emergency Needs from Extreme Weather. And there was, well, let me turn it over to Jamie DeMarco, who's a proxy for Jennifer Mizrahi. So
thank you very much. And happy to speak to this. And thanks to everyone and Madam Secretary for the meeting today. I think this is really important. The Responding to Emergency Needs from Extreme Weather Act, the Renew Act, brings in additional revenue to the state to relieve the burden of taxpayers from the cost of climate change that we're currently paying. Annapolis today is spending $50 million to renovate their dock because it is chronically flooded. Baltimore is paying, among other things, to renovate a city college to give it air conditioning. It was built in the 1800s, never needed air conditioning before, but is now no longer safe to have classes in those schoolrooms during the school year because it is too hot. That is costing them a great deal of money. They're having to relocate those students for 2 years or more as they do those renovations. Howard County and the state of Maryland are spending $228 million to bore an 18-foot diameter drainage tunnel through granite bedrock underneath Ellicott City to address the increased stormwater runoff after they experienced 2 once-in-a-thousand-year rain events within the span of 2 years. These are all costs being borne today that are contributing to our overall budget problem, and all of those costs I listed are being borne by Maryland taxpayers. I'd like to move to amend this language to account for the fact that the Renew Act is changing in the coming year. Last year's bill had the number of $9 billion for the amount collected from the international fossil fuel companies that this would charge, none of which are based in Maryland, all of which operate in Maryland, and they would not be able to pass this cost on to consumers. That $9 billion was based on Senator Van Hollen's number when he introduced this policy at the federal level. Van Hollen has changed that number, and so we didn't want to keep the same number. And we also decided that the most robust way to do this is to actually do an analysis and do a study of how much climate change is costing Maryland today and projected into the future so that we can charge these companies exactly how much is required to cover the cost of climate change in Maryland. And so I would like to, the motion I have is to change the language to include that study, which will be included in this year's bill.
As written, I would not consider it a friendly amendment. I was called to say that what my position would be if it was changed to a study. I don't have a problem with this being changed to a study, but this adds for the purpose of joining other states and assessing the fee. At the mitigation work group, I expressed my view that only one other state has actually adopted this as of the current time, and that's Vermont. New York governor has not signed it. No other state has passed it. It would, in my opinion, be passed on, despite the language in the statute, that it would be, I believe, challenged successfully in court and therefore set aside. And I think the fiscal note, which suggested it would cost us $1 million a year to litigate it, and there wouldn't be any money collected until sometime after 2031 is correct. The language as written, I believe, presupposes that the fee would be assessed on major carbon polluters rather than assessing whether a fee should be assessed. I would consider a friendly amendment if it were changed to a study to determine whether a fee should be assessed.
I do not, I appreciate that. I would not consider that amendment to be a friendly amendment to my amendment.
So process-wise, this is an amendment that will need to be voted on via a motion. And so we can just discuss it and then handle the motion.
Any other comments on this one before we go to a vote?
David Smetic?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not following process-wise enough. My apologies. So what I'm seeing on the screen is, again, is that completely supplanting the previous draft that we had of 1C?
Yes, that's right. This one would similarly be, we're not showing it in red line here because it would be too messy. This is simply replacing the version that is on the table with what we see on the screen. Dr. Gilden?
And this is new as of right now, because I haven't seen this language yet, so. Okay.
That's
Got
right.
it.
Okay, so the amendment is to recommend the General Assembly commission a study or analysis of the cost of climate change to the state for the purpose of assessing a fee on major carbon polluters. Is there any other discussion about this amendment?
I don't mean to continue to drag us through, but I want to make sure I understand the original recommendation draft was essentially pass the Renew Act, which was establishing a fee on the companies to pay for mitigation efforts and adaptation efforts. Apologies for the butchery summary there, but now this is saying that the new legislative proposal would be to study the projected costs of climate change, and then that bill, in air quotes, would be put to those same companies? Or are we saying that we would be assessing whether we would do the study, find out what the bill is, and then we may join other states in asking to, or we may join other states in then seeking the actual fee from folks?
Thank you for that question, David. It is, my intent of the language, Michael Powell read correctly, is that we would do the analysis and then do the study of how much it costs and then charge the companies that amount. And that is what we would be recommending.
Okay.
And for what it's worth, if this were voted down, I would offer an amendment to do a study and then make the decision about whether to assess a fee as you've described, David.
Gotcha. Thank you both.
So can I just ask a process question? Maybe I missed it, but didn't Delegate Stein put something on the table to withdraw this? Why are we debating a substitute now? Did we vote on that already? I missed that.
That was the prior one.
Yeah,
so that was MWG 1B. We're now looking at MWG 1C. We have a motion that has not yet been seconded. We have a motion from Jamie DeMarco to amend 1C, not 1B, to read according to the screen here, rather than the version you have, which is in the materials here.
So this is a motion in the form of a substitute, but
We've already
something that's still on the table?
No. So the one that you're referring to, we should just be clear, Chris. 1B, maybe some other people missed it. There was a motion to withdraw that one, and we had a silent vote saying, is there an issue? Does anyone have any conversation about it? No one did, which means it's passed and we moved on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry about that if we weren't clear. Very sorry.
See a hand from Delegate Stein.
Thank you. Just so I'm clear, so with this amendment, with the legislation that will be introduced to implemented, both require the study about the current and projected costs, and at the same time say that once the study is complete, this fee shall be assessed against major carbon polluters.
That is my intent in this language.
And it is the way I read it, and don't accept it as friendly.
Okay. Thank you.
But the commission would be voting on just the study.
Study part, yep.
We're not.
No, it's not as written. He's written language that's intended to say the commission recommends that this fee be imposed once the study sets the amount. The study is for the amount to be imposed, not whether to impose it. I'm happy to propose language that would change it, but I think Jamie's made it clear that he does want to have us authorize imposing a fee as soon as the study determines the amount. And if Jamie, if I've misstated it, let me know. But I think that's your intent of your language, and I read it as you were successful in at least that intent.
No, that is correct.
Okay. So, okay, so that is the intent, which is, I'm just reading it myself. Now that you brought that up.
We have a hand from Dr. Gilden.
So can I ask if anybody has had any conversation with anybody in the legislation? Because this is already a proposed bill last year, right? Am I being correct?
The bill didn't pass last year.
Right, but it was introduced last year.
Yeah.
And so has anybody had a conversation, or is this a totally new idea that we are putting forth that we would expect somebody or the General Assembly to take up?
Sure. Jamie, correct me if I misunderstood, but there is going to be a bill this session. Jamie indicated that the intent of this amendment would be to align with the forthcoming bill, the one that is being introduced for the 2025 session.
And I can, like, the language is the language. We can all read the language. And this doesn't force anything. I mean, the bill, as they're saying, will come back this year and will still have to be debated. But kind of regardless of my intent, like, this is the language that we are voting on.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think we can recommend to the General Assembly whatever we want. I mean, that's our purpose. Obviously, the General Assembly doesn't have to follow our recommendation. What this language would say is that this commission and each of those voting in favor of it recommends to the General Assembly that a fee be imposed on these companies and the amount be set by a study. But you would be voting for recommending that the General Assembly impose the fee this year, the amount to be determined by the study. That's my reading of this proposed amendment.
And I think for clarity, the key words here are that the General Assembly commission a study and then for the purpose of the subsequent actions. So I guess it comes down to your read of that for the purpose of, and whether that is explicitly impose a fee or that is the purpose of the study.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to suggest language that would I mean, at this point, I think you got a motion and you're waiting for a second. But as I said, if this language did not pass, I'd be happy to craft one that called for a study to be done about whether to impose a fee and what the fee would be if it was imposed, but not language that presupposed that a fee will be imposed and the study is only to decide the amount. That's the part that I don't accept as friendly.
Sorry.
No, and I'm just going to say that I think it is very significant if this commission votes to tell the General Assembly they should impose this fee, which I understand it's no longer 9 billion, but it's some huge sum of money. And it, in my opinion, one, it will be struck down by the court, but only after we spend $1 million a year litigating it. And if for some reason the commission upholds it, in my opinion, despite the language of the bill, it will be passed on to Maryland consumers.
I'll push back a little bit, just because to me, it is about a study. And I see what you're saying when we start interpreting what it means to us, what your intentions are, what the General Assembly will think. Reading it, it says recommend the General Assembly commission a study. For me, keywords, commission a study of the cost going on with the rest of the sentence for the purposes of, to me, it's still literally just a study. That's how I read it. That's how I would, if my interpretation of this is irrespective of if Jamie was there to tell me exactly what this meant, I would be reading this as it is just a study to figure out what those costs would be.
Yeah, well, respectfully, though, if that's the reading, it can be clarified to make that clear. But you have the drafter of it who says that's not what he intended. And if we don't intend what the drafter intended, then it seems to me we could easily clarify the language.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the
Okay.
mitigation working group did pass the original language to give to us, which it suggested to pass the bill, which would impose the fee. So I think that the mitigation working group kind of recommended to us as the full commission that this move forward. I understand this was another one of the closer votes, but so when I was having my question, it wasn't necessarily behind the merit of it. I just wanted to understand what the actual distinctions were between the numbers. So I think that I like this language. I don't have a problem with it moving forward. And it seems to me to align with what the mitigation working group voted successfully forward on for the most part, with just some updated pieces to align with what will be introduced. So I understand some of the concerns, but I do believe that this was voted positively from the mitigation working group up to us.
Thank you, too. We have a hand up from Beth Harbor.
Thank you. Thanks for calling on me. So I am looking at a different part of the language, which I really like, which is for the purpose of joining other states in assessing a fee. And because this would be parallel to a RGGI, that multiple states would be doing it together. And so I think that language is an improvement, and I appreciate, the opportunity to look at some alternate language.
I forgot to say in my closing remarks, I do second Jamie's motion. That was my entire purpose of actually coming off to say that part, and then I got in my own head. I appreciate that.
Sure thing. And we will consider ourselves in discussion of the motion, since there seems to still be appetite. Are there any other thoughts to offer or potential language that could be amenable to all parties?
I just think, Jamie, because of, this is a tough one. It's kind of become tough. That you've made it clear what your intentions are, even though that's not clearly what it says here. It looks like it's on path of what we've been saying today about studying what we need to know and the impacts. But you're making it clear that your intention is different. And that's what we're all thinking about when we vote now.
Would it
What
help
your
you,
intentions are, not what's written.
would it help you, Madam Secretary, if I define the simple change I would make if it were my amendment, just to clarify?
Sure.
In place of the word joining, I would insert whether to join. And take out the word joining, and that would be the only change I would make. Oh, it should be determining whether to join.
Thank you for the suggestion. And I do not consider that amendment to my amendment to be friendly.
Okay, I understand. I just wanted to assist people in seeing what the alternatives I think were.
I think the motion has been moved and seconded.
Yep, I believe so.
It has. So if the commission is ready to call the question, the motion on the table is to replace the current draft of MWG number 1C with what we see on the screen here. Anticipating that there would likely be a subsequent vote on whether to include it in the annual report if this vote isn't unanimous. So, Madam Chair, if you're prepared to call the question, we can start to vote.
Yep. Jamie's hand is up. Do you have something else to add to this before?
That is my vote.
Oh, you're voting already. You're okay. You're ready to vote. Okay. All right. So are we calling the vote now?
Yes, we are. So the question is whether to amend MWG 1C, replace it with the text on the screen here. All in favor, please click the raise hand button online.
That raised hand button isn't working for me, but I don't.
Okay, those of you whose hands are up, please keep them online. Whose voice was that just now on the phone? Okay, if you're having technical difficulties, we can follow up afterwards. Okay, so we're going to close voting here. Please keep your hands up. Okay, thank you. You can lower your hands. If anyone is opposed to the amendment, please raise your hand now. Thank you. You can lower your hands. Any abstentions, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So the motion to amend passes, 21 yes, 2 no. So MWG 1C has been amended according to the screen. So the next step would be to consider its inclusion in the annual report as a separate item. Is there discussion of that, or do we have a motion on that question?
I move to include it in the report.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to include MWG number 1C in the annual report as amended on the screen here. Is there any discussion of the motion before we vote? Okay, then I suggest we vote. All of those in favor of including MWG 1C as amended in the final report, please raise your hands. Okay, please keep them up. Okay, last call for votes. Okay, thank you. You can lower them. Okay, yes votes, lower your hand. All of those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. You can lower them. Any abstentions, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So MWG, the vote was 22 in favor, 2 opposed. So MWG 1C will be included in the annual report. So the remaining recommendations, we have 2 that the commission has started discussion of, but run out of time in prior meetings from the Energy Resilience and Efficiency Working Group. So we'll be asking Andrew Place, the staff facilitator for that working group, to join. But just to refresh the commission's memory, recommendation 1A has already been approved. It is 1B that was considered, and then there ran out of time. There was some confusion in the last meeting. There was EREWG number 2. The commission tabled that back in September. So what remains is EREWG number 3, which the commission began discussion of in September, but again ran out of time. So it is 1B and 3 in your materials that we'll consider now.
All right, thank you, Chris. Yeah, this is Andrew Place. I'm also here representing as chair of the working group and respective working group. All right, if I may offer a friendly amendment on behalf of the working group by shortening the first sentence and deleting everything that follows. Consequently, 1B would read as follows. The state should consider shifting the utility scale solar program from a REC-based subsidy model to a competitive bid model, period.
Okay, thank you, Andrew, for that suggestion from the working group. Is there discussion from the commission of 1B and the suggestion from the working group to shorten it? Yes, Kim Coble.
This seems fairly ambiguous. I mean, what do we, the state, can we name a agency or some responsible party? I mean, it's sort of in the realm of achieving world peace. That feels very loose to me.
Well, that was the intention of the working group, was to leave this as non-prescriptive. There are models in other states that run it through their public service commission or equivalent. But it was the intent of the working group, as I said, to leave this as non-prescriptive, that the proper venue for that consideration was in the legislative space.
So do you mean that the General Assembly should consider?
Yes, this would need to be a regulatory, a statutory change.
Maybe we should say that then.
Thank you.
And Ian?
I think I have a sort of, to build on what Kim was asking. It says should consider shifting. So it's not a recommendation to shift to this model. It's to consider shifting. So are we asking for a study in line with what we were talking about earlier? I'm just not clear on what we're recommending.
I don't believe the intent of the working group was for study. It was to bring visibility to moving moving utility scale solar projects or procurement from the RPS into a competitively procured model, with the intent that would not only address the failures or the lack of ability for Maryland to be meeting its goals under the RPS, as well as that these procurements would occur as build out in Maryland would be likely the model that would be, I would think the General Assembly would adopt. That's looking at what New Jersey does, for example. That's the intent. It brings these generation sources into the economy of the state, and then the economy benefits from that economic activity.
And Andrew, did the work group do its own analysis? Maybe study is too strong a word, but did it look at, whether this model is better than a REC-based model, which it seems to be the implication. I'm just trying to understand sort of the basis for that implication.
Yeah, it was based on the expertise of those who were the experts that are in the working group, and a consideration of these programs in other states, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, and the belief from that expert opinion that those are more cost efficient and effective ways at meeting Maryland's obligations or desires under the greenhouse gas emissions reductions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my standpoint, that might be true. It also might not be true. I just don't know if we have a lot to go on in order to make that judgment here. And the language is just a little unclear, like I said, about, should consider shifting. So I'm just uncomfortable with this, this approach.
Yeah, I think that was intent in the word consider being in there, that it should consider.
And I'll just a refresher, the working group had originally proposed simply shift. And then it was discussion at the September commission meeting that had put on the table altering it to consider shifting. Okay, the hand up from Mike Powell.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand this. When you say a competitive bid, is it the assumption that this would be a bid for state grants and money from the state? Or are you talking about somehow RGGI funds going through or CEF funds going through to be bid on? I'm just trying to understand what it is the proposal is.
Yeah, again, under the proviso that this was intended not to be prescriptive, but by the word shift in there was saying, all right, well, Maryland ratepayers, Maryland's economy is acquiring attributes of clean energy by the REC model and the revenues that come into that REC model. This would replace that, shift this into a procurement of generation by if you look at the New Jersey model, their Bureau of Public Utilities puts out a procurement for 300 megawatts of utility scale solar in a given year. That's how this conceivably could work. But the working group's intent was not to prescribe a simple cut and paste of another state's framework.
Yeah, what I was trying to get at is where the money comes from. I mean, the REC is part of RGGI. If we're not going to be doing this through RGGI, where does the money for the competitive bid come from? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, well, these RECs aren't through RGGI. This is through the RPS. These are RPS RECs.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So
So
you have
yes.
the RPS.
Yeah, this would be, you would use the same avenue for procuring of those funds. And it would go through the utility prorated on their utility territory. I would think that's how you would conceive of the process or the system design.
Okay, Brian McGully.
I think it would be potentially helpful to indicate that the thing that would be procured through this mechanism, this competitive bid model, would still be an environmental attribute like a REC. In these other states, the difference between what Maryland has and the states that are listed here as examples are that there's a central procurement mechanism for the attribute, for the REC, as opposed to the REC being procured bilaterally through a market-based mechanism. So I think it should be clear that what it is that's being procured as a REC is just being done through this competitive bid model, as opposed to a model that allows third parties to freely exchange them.
Okay.
Because otherwise it's not clear that it's not clear what the state is actually procuring and on whose behalf.
So you're not talking about a competitive bid to build utility scale solar. You're talking about competitive bid for the RECs from a utility scale solar. Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? I'll note then, process-wise, we would need a commissioner to make a motion to amend the recommendation in accordance with the suggestion from the working group, and then the commission could vote on that.
Chris, I think I'm just uncomfortable with this whole recommendation. I just don't know on what basis. I understand the working group made that recommendation on their own basis. I know that one of the reasons why we're dealing with it on December 12th is just because, I think there's been some discomfort or just lack of understanding with the whole recommendation. I know that there's probably going to be a bill that will do this, and that's where this is coming from. But I'm not prepared at this point to endorse that model. That's just speaking for MEA. We haven't coordinated or discussed it. I just think it's a little bit premature. I know a few states have it. Most states do not. I think that, it would be worth investigating it further to really understand why that's better. Not with, I understand there's some criticisms to the current, RPS model and the way it's performed in the state. But at the same time, this is a pretty dramatic change, I think, that's being proposed. And it's, it says the General Assembly should consider. It just makes me uncomfortable, that's all. So I think that I would vote no.
On its overall inclusion.
Yeah. I guess I jumped. I guess I skipped ahead of the amendment to the overall inclusion. Yeah, but I don't think that it makes a difference regardless of what the amendment says. Yeah.
it would also be an option before the commission to table this for the further reconsideration if there isn't enough time right now. That would be an option available to commissioners as well.
Just from my perspective, I think this one, yeah, we debated this last time, and I know, Andrew, thank you. You've come back with some, you know, with more information for us, but this one seems like it's, I think it might be more appropriate to send it back to the working group. And maybe we can talk about this next year. We don't have a whole lot of time. I mean, I do want us to spend time, but this one, it just seems we don't have it at a point where we can get everyone to understand what the real purpose is and just get everybody comfortable with that, with this one. That's how I'm thinking.
Okay, so then if there is agreement on that point, I would recommend the commission entertain a motion to table this for next year.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
Okay, so the motion before the commission is whether to table EREWG 1B for further reconsideration next year. Is there any discussion on the motion before we vote? No? Okay, then why don't we take the vote? All in favor of tabling EREWG number 1B until next year, please raise your hands. Okay, thank you. You can lower your hands. Any opposed to the motion, please raise your hands. If there are any abstentions, please raise your hands. Okay, thank you. So this EREWG number 1B has been tabled until next year, 24 in favor with 1 abstention. So EREWG number 3.
All right, thank you very much. In support of the state energy planning framework, Maryland must invest in a user-friendly, transparent model for statewide planning to inform policy and administrative decisions. The model should enable cost-benefit analysis of power prices by resources, be detailed enough to enable location value planning and support the transition to a clean energy workforce. The model should also consider time horizons for commercialization of energy technologies and when those technologies may appear in the market.
Thank you, Andrew. Is there discussion from the commission?
Okay.
Okay, then the commission call the question through a motion of whether to include this in the annual report. A motion to include this in the annual report. Do we have such a motion?
Motion.
Second.
And we have a second. So the question is on including EREWG number 3 in the annual report in its current form. Is there any discussion of the motion before we vote? Okay, then we're ready to vote. All in favor of including EREWG number 3 in the annual report, please raise your hands. Please keep them up. Okay, thank you. You can lower them. Any opposed to including it in the annual report? Please raise your hands. Are there any abstentions? Please raise your hands. Okay, thank you all. EREWG number 3 will be included in the annual report. So good news, bad news. Good news, congratulations. That completes the recommendations. Bad news is not bad news. We have one final thing to tie up, one loose end before we can turn to the annual report as a whole. We had language suggested by Secretary Flora as not necessarily a recommendation, but context for the recommendations to include at the beginning of the recommendations section. It is shown here on the screen. To tie this up, we will need simply a motion on whether to include it. Jason.
Yeah. Thank
And,
you.
oh, Secretary Alex.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's my motion. Thank you.
Okay, moved and seconded. Is there any discussion of the motion, including this text? Yes, Jason.
Yeah, Chris, and thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Flora with Maryland Department of Planning apologizes that she can't be here today. She's at the Baltimore Vacancy Reinvestment Council meeting. She asked me, and she asked Commission to consider this language for the annual report, mainly because our department and the Moore Miller administration is proposing a bill next session to amend Maryland's sustainable growth policy to include resiliency and equity. This policy is established in existing Maryland law, and we just thought it'd be useful to make sure it's there for context as we continue to guide policy discussions to ensure concurrent achievement of multiple community needs in Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Kim Coble.
Thanks, Jason. What's the impetus for this? It's coming in at the 11.
No, this was in the
59
original recommendations at the very, very beginning. This is not new today. This has been the reports that MD has distributed from the beginning. But the impetus mainly is really just to make sure people are aware that we're putting forward a bill this session to make sure people understand we're shifting from smart growth to sustainable growth, and making sure to reflect the inclusion, resiliency, and equity, and make sure this is a guiding policy for our efforts moving forward. So, but this has been.
Let me rephrase. So, but what happens to our recommendations? Like
this is for context moving forward, for sure. So there's no adjustments to your recommendations in the report itself, but this is context for moving forward. So it doesn't have to be in the recommendations section itself. We still need a vote to make sure it's in, at the least, in the annual report itself. So
yeah, I think I would feel better about that. Chris, I don't know, did we discuss this or see this before? I don't remember this, but anyway, if we could maybe just put it in the annual report. I mean, the concept I get, but it's proposed recommendations, and the first one is these recommendations are guided by this policy, and I don't even know. So I'm a little uncomfortable with that.
we're fine with that as a friendly amendment to have this
Okay.
in the report itself.
Thank you, Jason.
Sure.
Okay, so if that's what the commission desires, we will find an appropriate part of the annual report to include this text. It is not in the draft before you, so I do think procedurally we will need a vote just to accept that. Yeah. Okay, and so I think we can, with Jason's consent, we consider that to be the motion on the floor, that that this be incorporated in an appropriate part of the annual report.
Thank you.
If there's no other discussion, then we can take a vote on the motion. Okay, well, let's start to vote. So we are voting on including this text in the annual report.
I'm sorry. Oh,
Yes.
Is this merely
ma'am.
instructions for us? I mean, is this like giving us I'm trying to understand too. I'm sorry, but I've in my mind, I'm like, is this instructions for us? I'm just trying to understand what this is.
It's context for the commission to be taken into consideration as they move forward in 2025. So in the next set of recommendations, for example, and the work of the commission as a whole, it should be taken into as an overarching type context for the commission.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I'm sorry, you can go ahead with the vote.
Okay, thank you. So all in favor, please raise your hands. Let's keep them up. Okay, please keep them up. Last call. All right, thank you. You may lower your hands. Any opposed, please raise your hands. Okay, are there any abstentions? Okay, thank you all. So we will include that in the annual report. So now we have completed consideration of the recommendations. So we can turn to the next item. Which is considering the annual report itself. Russ Dickerson, is that a leftover vote hand?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Bad connection.
Yeah, sure thing. Okay, so the final action that the commission must take every year is approving the annual report. Our process is that we consider each of the recommendations one by one for inclusion in the annual report, and then the annual report itself needs to be approved at the end. We have provided in the last two meetings a draft of the entire annual report with a blank in the recommendations part. So what we will be asking the commission to vote upon is approving the annual report, understanding that staff will add in all of the final recommendations as they were approved. And two, ECO will, the Education Communication Outreach Working Group will format it nicely. This is the unformatted draft that you all have available. So we'll be asking for that vote to approve the annual report pending those cleanup items by the staff and ECO Working Group. Under the commission's, yep. Is there any discussion before we vote?
Oh, I was going to move that, so.
Thank you for the reminder. Yes, of course, we do need a motion. We have a motion from Ken Coble. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Okay, thank you. So we will call the vote under the commission's rules. We need an affirmative vote of a supermajority of the commission, that is 16 votes yes, in order to approve the annual report. All in favor of approving the annual report?
Can I ask a question?
Sorry, Dr. Gilden,
Make a
yes.
comment? In the science follow-up, the latest science, is it possible to have some sort of consistency as to the references? Because some of them are websites, some of them are actual citations. There's no like order to them.
We can certainly work with the STWG to settle on a citation style and enforce
Yep,
it.
I'll work. Sorry about that, Robin. We'll clean that up with MDE. Thank you. Thanks for noticing. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Goldman. So we'll return to the vote. All in favor of approving the annual report, subject to the cleanup items we've discussed, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. You can lower them. Any opposed to approval of the annual report, subject to the cleanup items, please raise your hands. Zach, I believe that was a hand was for yes, not no, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, thank you. Any opposed? Okay, are there any abstentions? Okay, thank you. The annual report is approved. It is due by statute this Sunday. So MDE staff and ECO are working quickly to finalize in the next 24 hours so that we can formally submit it to the Governor and General Assembly through the state process. Thank you all and congratulations.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Chris, for facilitating.
Thank you.
So next steps, you all will get a little bit of time off from commission meetings, and we'll be following up for the work next year, including for our first meeting of the year, scheduling that.
I'll end by saying we have so many different work groups now and legislation that we had to get staffed, and we have them now. And honestly, because of that, it creates a whole lot more work for us. And I think that's what slowed the process this time. But we're going to get better next year. We'll be able to get through these things a lot faster, I hope. So thank you. Thank you all. I guess the
Thank
meeting
you.
is adjourned. All right. Bye.